When EU heads of state met in Brussels 21st October, some member states called for tougher sanctions on Russia due to the recent and massive bombings in Aleppo, Syria, with support from the Russian army. However, the EU leaders couldn't agree to impose tougher restrictive measures, since some member states said no. Led by the Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi, they managed to remove a reference to new sanctions linked to the bombings in Syria.
Io credo che non abbia senso inserire anche qui un riferimento alle sanzioni.
The UK, Germany and France were the ones pushing for fresh EU sanctions against Russian individuals and companies involved in the Syrian conflict. The French president, who has described the events in Aleppo as war crimes, and who met with the Russian president Vladimir Putin in Berlin just before the EU meeting, said the aim was to provoke a ceasefire.
La première demande, c'est la prolongation de la trêve, l'arrêt de tous les bombardements et l'acheminement de l'aide humanitaire.
Instead of going for sanctions, the EU leaders condemned the attacks by the Syrian regime and its allies, notably Russia, on civilians in Aleppo in the meeting conclusions. But this doesn't mean that the door for further sanctions is closed. EU Council President Donald Tusk concluded that if Russian aggression continues, the EU could respond.
It considers all available options if these atrocities continue.
Fraser Cameron, director at the EU-Russia Centre, doesn't believe, though, that the EU will go for harder sanctions on Russia. But he still thinks the mood towards the country has changed. The previous talk about easing sanctions is no longer on the table.
So there's been a fundamental breakdown of trust because of what has happened over Syria. I mean, when you start bombing hospitals and aid convoys and you see children being pulled out of rubble, this obviously has a huge political impact.
The most likely scenario is therefore that Europe doesn't decrease nor increase the sanctions on Russia, but simply prolongs the existing measures once they expire end of January.